Welcome to the Next Level Facebook Ads Podcast with Phil Graham. We help you master Facebook ads and give you an unfair advantage over your competition. Are you ready? Let's go.
What's up, podcast family? Welcome to the Next Level Facebook Ads Podcast, episode 384. I'm Phil Graham. Today, I'm going to be sharing my top 5 tips for writing what I would call scroll-stopping headlines for your Facebook ads. You guys, headlines matter. First impressions matter. There are so many people that will scroll by your ad and decide whether they're going to stop and pay attention or not based off of what they see in your headline. It's not the only thing that they're going to judge, but for some people it is. And it depends on the person. Some might judge by a thumbnail. A lot are going to judge by a headline. And so great headlines can not only sometimes help improve the relevance of your ad in terms of who you're trying to connect with and how you connect with them, but having better relevance can sometimes, at least potentially, also help lower ad costs in certain situations. But I think more importantly, a really great headline for your ads can help you not only connect with your ideal audience, but also differentiate from your competitors and just from the crowd and from all the noise that is out there. And it can really mean, in a lot of situations, the difference between your ad getting noticed and somebody stopping to pay attention versus people that just keep on scrolling. And so having great headlines could make a huge difference in your ads. So before we jump in, if you guys are looking for one-on-one coaching to learn ads, or if you're looking for somebody to run your ads for you, or if you've got ideas for podcast episode topics, for any of that stuff, just go to my website, philgrahamdigital.com, or you can DM me on Instagram at philgrahamdigital, and let's connect. Now, this is totally random. I just learned this a few minutes ago. I thought I would just share a random fact with you guys. It's about honey. I don't know. I was reading some article that just popped up about honey. Apparently, it never spoils. Like, am I the last one to learn this? I had no idea. They said that some honey was found like from 1,000 years ago and somebody ate it and they didn't get sick. So apparently you can just store honey forever. I don't know if it's true, so maybe don't go eat 1,000-year-old honey, but I just thought it was kind of a weird, random fact that I figured I'd share with you guys, because why not? We're hanging out on a podcast. But with that being said, let's jump into the content and talk about these 5 tips for scroll stopping Facebook ad headlines, because like I said earlier, it is so important. It does not matter what the rest of your ad is or what your video is or your product or service if you can't get them to stop and pay attention. So here's 5 tips for helping them to stop and pay attention. So tip number 1 is to keep your headline extremely clear and concise and focused. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make with headlines is it's too generic, it's too general. Look at the headlines you either have or you've thought about running with. And I want you to think of it this way. People look at ads differently. Some people only look at a headline. Some people only look at a thumbnail or image or video. Others look at the ad copy above that. And other people kind of scan a combination of all of those things or some of those things. But there's a lot of people that will look at just one thing out of those 3 and decide whether they want to actually stop and pay attention or keep scrolling. A headline is one of the big ones. I think it's more than any of the others, the one that will determine whether people stop or not. So here's how I look at it. I want you to silo your ad in your mind. Imagine that if somebody only looked at your headline, would they know what the ad is about? Or is it so general, is it so generic that they're not going to know unless they also look at the image or the thumbnail or read the copy above? Remember, a lot of people only look at one key area. So what I do is I try and make sure each of the 3 key areas, the headline, and then either the image or thumbnail, if it's a video, and then the ad copy above it. Each of those 3 individual key areas, if they only looked at one of those, It should do a good job of at least telling you a little bit about what your ad is about and why that's important to them. So you want to keep your headline concise and clear and focused. Like, for example, this would be a bad example. And I've seen this on a lot of headlines. Don't miss out on this deal. Now, I would say that in some cases, maybe for retargeting, that could be good because they might already know about you and they've seen the deal. But besides that, I would not recommend that as of right now for a headline because it's way too general. Think about it. If you only see those words, don't miss out on this deal, and you're not looking at anything else, it literally could be for anything. It is so general that most people are going to keep going and just never stop and look at your ad. So don't do that. Make sure that if they only look at the headline, they at least know what your ad is about or your product or service, depending on the scenario. And that's tip number one. Tip number two is I recommend that you guys use either numbers or a list or questions to help grab attention with your headlines. Questions is really one of my favorite ways to go when it comes to headlines, but I also like numbers and lists. Here's an example. You could say, here's 7 ways to, and then you could put in whatever the rest is, depending on what your headline's about. 7 ways to save on your next vacation. That would be a lot better than just a general headline about how to save money on travel. Which one sounds better? How to save money on travel, or 7 ways to save on your next vacation, or even 7 ways to save on travel? That number, 7 ways, just seems better for a lot of people, and it has a better chance of getting their attention. Kind of like this podcast episode. What's my topic? My top 5 tips for writing scroll stopping Facebook ad headlines. I used a number in there. And so those things can work really well. And again, I love questions as headlines as well. That's probably my favorite thing to do is to ask questions, because when somebody reads a question, typically they're not going to read it out loud, but they're thinking about it in their head as they read it. And it kind of internalizes it more because it's a question. And so that has the ability to get them to stop even for a split second longer and then think about it. And they might look at the rest of your ad because of that. So definitely play around with using numbers, lists, and questions in your headlines. I like all of those things. I wouldn't do all of those in just one headline necessarily, but do headlines that incorporate those things and test, and that could make a big difference. Tip number 3, I highly recommend that, not for every ad, but for a lot of your ads, I want you to try and address your ideal customer's pain points and or their desires really focused and directly with a headline. Because a lot of times, again, headlines are so generic and general. If that's all somebody's looking at, they're just going to keep scrolling. But if you're talking about their pain points, something that's important to them, you have a much better chance of getting their attention. Imagine that you were the ideal audience. And let's say your back hurt and it's been hurting for a long time. You're sick of it. You see a headline from a chiropractor that just offers a general discount for coming in and getting an x-ray. That may or may not get your attention. But if the chiropractor is talking about how they help people with back pain, that's related to your actual pain point, like literally pain, right? Get it? That's related to your pain point directly. The chances of that getting your attention are much higher. So addressing somebody's pain points or their desire, or both, depending on if you could fit that in the small space you have for headlines, could make a big difference. So I've got an example. You could do something like struggling with, and then fill that in. Struggling with low energy, or struggling with your finances, struggling with Facebook ads, whatever pain point you solve. You could start with struggling with and then put in the pain point. And then what you could do right after that is try this instead. And I may expand that a little bit depending on how much room we have and trying, because if you could, instead of try this, if you can actually describe what this is, so it's more specific, that could be even better. But a lot of times there's not enough room. But if you start with their pain point, struggling with, and fill that in, try this instead, or try this simple something instead, that could be a good headline that could potentially really get somebody's attention and then get them to engage with the rest of your ad. So I really like using pain points And then desires too. It doesn't always have to be something that people are struggling with. You could also talk about something they want, something they desire. And then that would be similar, but instead of the struggle, you'd be focused on the desire of what they want and how you can help them get that. That's a great tip for great headlines. Tip number 4, great headlines will sometimes incorporate a sense of urgency. Now, we don't always do this. Not every headline will have this, but some of them will. So using terminology and phrases like limited time offer or ending soon or flash sale, things like that, especially through your retargeting, that's where that can really do extremely well in certain scenarios. But having some kind of a sense of urgency in your headline so that people know this isn't just going to last forever, whether it's a product or service that could sell out, or maybe a course you have that's going to close, on a certain day, but really having that sense of urgency and a headline makes a big difference. Now, you're not going to be able to do all of these necessarily in one headline because there's not enough room. That's why you want to test different headlines in different ways. And you're going to have some for retargeting, some for the top of the funnel, and try and use all these things, just not in the same headline, obviously. And then last, but of course, not least, tip number 5 is to consistently A/B test your headlines so you can see what works best. One thing that I've noticed over the years of running ads, many times just changing a headline could make the difference between an ad that doesn't work versus an ad that does and does really well. Not always. There's other factors, other things we have to change sometimes, but headlines are definitely one of the things that can make a huge difference. And so no matter how good you think a headline is, I would still test it. Test it against other variations, other headlines, and that's going to help you a lot. You can test it at the same time and run them against each other, or you can test one headline and then stop it and start a new ad and test another one. There's lots of ways to do it, but just make sure you are testing different headlines, giving them about the same amount of time and ad spend to run, and then choosing the ones that work well. And then when you see what works well, look for trends, because if you find a formula for your exact situation that works really good in a headline, you can start creating little variations using that same formula. And it's always different for every type of situation. So that's where your skill and evaluation of that data can really help you. So these top 5 tips for writing those scroll stopping headlines could make a big difference. Make sure you guys implement this stuff. My friends, episode 384 is in the books. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to get in touch, philgrahamdigital.com is the website, or you can DM me on Instagram at philgrahamdigital. Now we'll talk to you on next week's episode. Peace out.
Thanks for listening to the Next Level Facebook Ads Podcast. Please remember to subscribe and share this with all your friends. For show notes, more tips, and to learn more about Phil, please visit philgrahamdigital.com/podcast.